Long time no see, nerds. Just Jamie here with
your friend Claude.
And this is Nerd Bomber vs. Movies, the show where two movies fight and we pick a winner. We've got an interesting show for you today, an interesting episode with an interesting set of movies. The movies are 1988's License to Drive and 1996's Biodome. Claude, why don't you tell us more about why these movies are the films we're featuring today?
Once upon a time, in this brain of mine, it made sense to think about how Corey Feldman was a notorious wild child of Hollywood with kind of a bunch of funny movies in the 80s into the 90s, to his credit. And Pauly Shore was a notorious wild child of Hollywood in the 90s with a bunch of funny movies, to his credit. So I thought it would be interesting to take one of each and pair them up. And that is what we've done for you today.
We've done it for you. We've done it to ourselves.
That's right.
And
you ain't kidding.
So those will be the two movies that we talk about today. In just a moment, Claude's going to get out of the way, and I'm going to be back with the basics. All right, I'm back as I said I would be with the basics. We're going to start with License to Drive from 1988, directed by Craig Beeman. Beeman is mostly known for a lot of TV. There's a lot of TV credits to his name. This was actually his first film, and he would later make some other movies, including Mom and Dad Save the World and Bushwhacked, but as I said, mostly a TV director. Writing this movie, we have Neil Tolkien, not related to J.R.R. This movie, he's mostly known for this movie. He also did the live-action Richie Rich movie. He did Jury Duty with Pauly Shore, as a matter of fact. Doing the music for this film, we have Jay Ferguson. He's actually known for 60s and 70s pop and rock bands like The Spirit and JoJo Goon. He later started composing for movies and TV, including most notably the theme for the American version of The Office. We're going to move right into cast now. We have the Coreys, Haim and Feldman, together again in one of several films they worked together on. Here they play Les Anderson and his friend Dean, respectively. Now, Haim is mostly known, Corey Haim that is mostly known for Silver Bullet, Murphy's Romance, and he also did The Lost Boys with Feldman that is. But he worked consistently right up until his untimely death in 2010 at the age of only 38. Corey Feldman, he's known for The Goonies, Stand By Me. He was actually the voice of Donatello in the first two Ninja Turtle live-action movies. And of course, he did The Lost Boys, as I just mentioned. Feldman has continued to work regularly in film and TV and music, and he has also become an advocate for sexual abuse victims after revealing his own experience as a survivor. Mrs. Anderson, the mom character, is played by Carol Kane. Of course, Kane needs no introduction from the likes of me. She has starred in films and TV for decades, including things like Taxi, Dog Day Afternoon. Of course, she had that role in The Princess Bride. And more recently, she's continued to work. More recently, she's in the show The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. And obviously, the list goes on and on and on from there, both before and after and everything in between. The character of Mr. Anderson, the father figure, is played by Richard Macer. He's another busy actor in this movie. He has lots of TV roles, lots of film roles to his credit. These include The Mary Tyler Moore Show, The Waltons, MASH, The Thing, Risky Business, Encino Man with Pauly Shore, and many, many others. All right, so the main teenage love interest in this movie, her name is Mercedes, and she is played by Heather Graham. This is actually Graham's first film role. She would later appear in Twin Peaks, Boogie Nights, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, and I'm the only person in the world who probably knows her most from the movie Lost in Space. And beyond those credits, there's also a lot of other roles under her name. So rounding out the cast after those leads, we have Michael Manasseri as Charles, Parley Bear as Grandpa, and you can also look for Uncle Phil himself, James Avery, and frequent 80s and 90s action movie bit player Grant Heslov in a couple of small roles in the film. Alright, so this film was in production in late 1987 for a summer 1988 release, and it did okay financially, as you'll see in just a minute. It didn't fare too well with critics. It was basically seen as perhaps a decent bit of light summer fare, nothing much more than that. In terms of its pop culture footprint, there isn't really much to speak of in that area either. As I just mentioned, it was nominally successful at the box office, but it really didn't propagate any type of merchandise or other ephemera in its orbit. Today, it's kind of mostly just caught up in the wake of both better known and more remembered teen movies of its era. And aside from a special edition DVD release in 2005, it hasn't garnered the kind of attention necessary to inspire, any reboots or sequels or other continuations or re-releases. All right, we're going to move on to the next movie, and that, of course, is Biodome from 1996. Directing here, we have Jason Blum. He's known for Overnight Delivery, Viva Las Nowhere, and he's done a lot of TV episodes, especially Veronica Mars. Writing, we have Kip Koenig and Scott Marsano, that is. They're both mostly known for this movie, and Koenig is known for Grey's Anatomy. Marsano's not known for much else other than this, as a matter of fact. Doing the music here, we have Andrew Gross. Again, you're going to hear some repeating movie titles because he's also most known for Overnight Delivery and Viva Las Nowhere. But he also had some other things going on. He did Eight Heads in a Duffel Bag, and he did the music for the compositions, that is, for Tenacious D and The Pick of Destiny, among others. All right, moving on to the cast. As Bud McIntosh, we have Pauly Shore. This movie is, of course, a Pauly Shore vehicle. Pauly Shore is basically most known for a series of comedy roles in the 90s. These include Encino Man, Son-in-Law, and Jury Duty. Playing Bud's friend Doyle Johnson is Stephen Baldwin. He is the youngest Baldwin brother, and he is known mostly for this movie, as well as 8 Seconds, The Usual Suspects, and Half-Baked, among other things. Dr. Faulkner is played by William Atherton. Of course, among many other roles, he was in Die Hards 1 and 2, and of course, he played Peck in Ghostbusters. The character of Monique is played by Joey Lauren Anderson. She's a very busy actress as well, but her roles, in terms of what we do here, you most know her from things like Coneheads, Dazed and Confused, Chasing Amy, and many others, including several in Kevin Smith's View Askew universe. There's a large remaining cast beyond that, as a matter of fact, but basically you can keep an eye out for a few familiar faces and voices, like appearing in small roles. We have Rose McGowan, Kylie Minogue, Taylor Negron, Jack Black, and Kyle Gass show up as Tenacious D, and you can also look for sketch comedy and voice acting legend Phil Lamar, and Squidward himself, Roger Bumpus, is the narrator. Okay. So while we score movies on this show based on their own merits, and as we observe them, I have to mention that this film is kind of legendarily bad. Not only was Pauly Shore a Razzie winner for it, but it is actually tied for the lowest score ever on Metacritic, with a score of 1 out of 100. And its current Rotten Tomato score is 4% on the tomato meter, although that score skyrockets all the way up to 51% for an audience score. Financially, this film also did nominally okay, just like the other one, as you'll see in a moment, but it didn't make much of an impact in terms of pop culture footprint. There was no real merchandise to speak of, and it hasn't really developed any significant cult fandom in more recent years. It just kind of swims in the sea of other questionable Pauly Shore flicks. Also, while Stephen Baldwin has been verbal in his desire to make a sequel, and he has claimed that Shore was in on it, there hasn't really been any movement in that area in the last time anything about such a project seems to have been mentioned was going back to 2017. So it's kind of doubtful anything in that like that is going to happen at this point. Okay, so that's the basics for License to Drive and Biodome. I'm going to give up the center chair, and Claude's going to be right back with the tale of the tape.
Greetings, fight fans and movie buffs. Welcome to the tale of the tape for tonight's main event of the evening between License to Drive and Biodome. Well, we are going to start, as always, with our distributing studio. For License to Drive, that was 20th Century Fox. And for Biodome, somehow MGM put that out. Both pretty evenly matched there, both legendary Hollywood studios. Let's see how the story progresses, though, from there. Moving down to ratings. Look, they're still evenly matched. Both of them, License to Drive and Biodome, are PG-13 rated movies. When you watch these, there's not a lot of surprise there. That rating makes sense in both cases, I would say. Moving down to running time. This is where they get a little bit distant from each other. License to Drive comes in at a very tight 88 minutes. Not even the standard 90-minute movie that a lot of comedies and B-movies and even better quality movies from the period clocked in at. And Biodome comes in 95 minutes, almost 10 full minutes more of fun and stuff. Moving down to release date. License to Drive came out in the summer, July 6th of 1988. However, Biodome came out in January, the 12th of 96 to be precise. And that is traditionally known as the Hollywood dumping ground. And yeah, perhaps as we continue on, you'll begin to understand how that relates to this movie. When it comes to budget, they kind of go back to being even with each other again. License to Drive was made for $8 million. Biodome was made for $8.5 million. You don't, I guess, technically see a lot of money on the screen in either movie. But you certainly do see it being wasted more in one of them. As far as what they earned, it's actually kind of impressive in both cases. License to Drive, on their $8 million budget, made almost $22.5 million. And Biodome actually made $13.4 million. So, you factoring in advertising and things like that, there wasn't a lot of profit left over, but somehow at the box office, neither of these were bombs. So there you have the raw numbers and how both movies match up with each other. Now let's open the doors and settle some scores.
All right, we're back. We are both, we can't both be in the center seat, but we're both here anyway, so it's time to talk about some scores. We are going to start with License to Drive, round one, which is visuals. I'll go first here. I'm giving License to Drive a 5.5. So just a hair under what we usually consider good. I think this might be our widest disagreement in terms of our scoring today. I'm giving a 5.5 for visuals because it's got there's a lot of unevenness in this movie, and that's going to spread to some of the other categories, some of the other rounds as well. In some ways, some of the things that it's doing visually are interesting. I kept comparing it to an Ernest film, and I know that seems odd for like an 80s teen movie, but there's just a lot of odd choices they're making for angles, especially on sort of like the small characters, very archetypal cartoony characters, odd up angles, borderline fisheye lens things happening. So those things are interesting, but the movie's not really committed to that sort of thing.
It comes and goes.
Yeah, and so I find a lot of the rest of the movie is just kind of sort of competently shot and very very competently composed, but nothing really jumps out at me. So I might be a little bit more friendly to the visual score if it seemed to sort of have a little bit of consistency with what it was trying to do. So that up and down nature of it is what kind of knocks it down just a little bit for me to that 5.5 range. What do you got going on?
I agree with your reasoning. For me, it goes up to a 7 for visuals for License to Drive. While those kind of camera tricks do come and go throughout the movie, I think they come at important points, at points that establish characters. Like they happen when a character is introduced, not necessarily throughout the character's usage, but when they come into the movie. And I guess that was enough for me to just set the stage of who this character is every time you see them.
Okay.
So when you combine those camera choices, the angles and the lenses and just the exaggerated appearance of them with their visual appearance, their costuming, their makeup, the DMV lady, this insane makeup, and with the camera down here and making her head look bulbous and like yellow teeth right into it, kind of. It's very effective at creating this intimidated teenager's point of view. So I guess I felt like it really set out to, or accomplished to do. Wow. Accomplish what it set out to do. And when you pair those things with just the fact that it was well shot, otherwise there wasn't anything that I struggled to be able to visually pick up on. Some of the set pieces that you see, the gigantic drive-in restaurant later on, I mean that was large, it was expansive, it was massive. I mean, maybe it's a real life location that's very famous, I don't know. But they like brought in all these 50s cars and like this whole massive scene, and they spend maybe 3 minutes there.
Right, yes.
But it is visually impressive, so for me it lifted the score up. So yeah, that's why I give License to Drive a 7 visually.
All right, so those are our scores in the visuals department for License to Drive. Now we're going to move on to Biodome, and I'm giving Biodome the same score I gave License to Drive, actually. I'm giving it a 5.5.
No better, no worse?
No better, no worse. Again, it's kind of like that half dash down from what we consider good, which is a 6 on this show. 5.5 is not necessarily an abomination or anything like that. You know, it sits right around the average mark. And again, I think Biodome has some interesting visual flares. Some of it very much places it into the time that it was made.
For sure.
And I struggled with that a little bit because it's either, because doing that in your film or in your art or in your music or whatever it is, when rewatched later, it can very much sort of firmly plant a movie in its time, and that can work for it or against it. It can either make it seem aged and old, or you might have to try to swipe those thoughts aside and look at it for what it is in its time, and did it do what it set out to do? I think this movie did. I think it wanted to sort of look like a little bit of a cartoon, a little bit of a music video, a lot of saturated colors, the font choices for the opening credits, scream 90s from beginning to end. I think some of the weaknesses come in that this is a high concept comedy. So you have this like science fiction, not really science fiction, but this science-y setting of the Biodome. And there's a scene where they kind of sneak out the back door, and it's clearly like a wooden frame. You can see the grain of the wood in this structure that's supposed to be this self-contained, biohabitat / experimental facility, and it's made out of a wood frame, and the tarp ceiling is blowing in the wind, even though it should be sealed off from the outside. So that is a weakness. Again, my markdown comes on a very technical level, and it's those weaknesses where here's this science fiction setting, but we can't quite pull it off. And so it gets a little markdown for me. So that's where I come. That's where I'm coming from with a score of 5.5.
Reaching beyond its $8 million budget.
Yeah, a little bit.
I go 1 full point higher, 6.5. Good and a half, if you will. I guess I give it more credit for what it does do while recognizing what it doesn't do. To me, the story of Biodome doesn't fall short on its visuals. It's probably the strongest aspect of the entire movie. I do think that this is where the budget was used most wisely overall. I think that everything that you see is well staged. Again, you said live action cartoon, and that's appropriate. So there is a certain amount of suspension of disbelief here in terms of like that this thing that they're in is actually sealed off appropriately from anything. But within it, everything looks pretty good. Everything looks pretty, comparable to other comedies that kind of need specialized locations, like Austin Powers.
Right.
Also kind of a lower budget comedy that uses these science fiction-y locations and things. So I don't have a problem with much. Even in the I guess it was college campus, not protest, but I don't know, like gathering, club gathering. Everybody is well costumed and it's populated with a lot of extras. It looks good, I guess is what I'm saying. There's nothing as impressive in Biodome as the drive-in thing I mentioned in License to Drive, or even there's nothing particularly clever going on with like the camera work in this case. So I guess that's why I score License to Drive higher. But overall, I think Biodome is visually acceptable and then some.
All right, well, that's fair enough. So there you have our visual scores for Biodome, 5.5, 6.5. Now it's time for round two. All right, so we're going to talk performances now for these two films. And Claude, I think it's your turn to go first.
Well, License to Drive, for me, gets a solid, good score of 6 in the performance category. I think what you see here is nobody is blowing anyone away with their prowess in terms of acting, but I will say that the Coreys, as they came to be known, are capable, reliable, solid performers. I mean, they're probably even more than capable. They are. I mean, they're still teenagers in this movie. Both of them have, at this point, a lot of experience from early childhood making movies. And Corey Feldman is kind of the Corey Feldman character in every movie past a certain age. And he does it well, and he's always entertaining. And Corey Haim, though, I think in this has the broader range of expectation put on him and delivers more. And I think going back across their career, that was always kind of the perception. Corey Haim was the actor, and Corey Feldman was the entertainer.
Sure.
And I think that you see that here. You get, again, coming back to the character actors, the people populating their world. There's a lot of really entertaining little moments with these kind of side characters. I mentioned earlier the DMV lady; she's a standout. Even their teacher, their DMV teacher, their driver's ed teacher, very short of being over the top, but very kind of pronounced and hammy almost. But entertaining. It doesn't go overboard. And then, of course, we get James Avery as the road test administrator, I guess. The road test giver. Very, very defined, interesting, quirky character. And if you're a pop culture or nerd culture fan like us, I mean, you'll know him as Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince. You'll know him as the Shredder. Like, he's always entertaining is the point I'm getting at. And he delivers in this movie as well. So overall, I feel pretty comfortable scoring the performances at a 6.
All right. So here's where our scores start to get a little closer together. I'm a little bit lower. I'm going 5.5. So I'm going under our good level, but that doesn't mean that it's bad either. It just means they're mostly across the board, they're average. I do agree with you. There are high points. A lot of the bit parts are performed in a fun way, But this is another example to me of the unevenness of this movie, because you have what's happening with the Coreys and their other friends and the sort of the teenagers of the movie is kind of a tropey teen movie of its day.
Absolutely.
And then what happens when you have these small bit characters is you have cartoon characters.
Yep.
And like you said, they're very archetypal. Now, they're fun. I like these characters. I like the DMV lady.
Yep.
I like the James Avery character. The drunk that steals the car is a ridiculous character. So those characters are fun. But again, I just had a little bit of trouble with the clash between those two worlds and those things not quite melding together as smoothly as maybe I would have liked. Everything you said was right about the performances. Corey Haim was carrying, I mean, he's really the protagonist of the movie.
Yeah.
Corey Feldman is playing the crazy friend.
Right.
And he's playing that character.
Yeah.
Haim has more to do. Another thing that knocks this movie down just a touch is that you have Carol Kane cast as the mother, and she has almost nothing fun to do.
It's a very different role for her.
It's very strange to have this type of performer be in a role like this, which is the mom.
Yeah.
Her almost every line she speaks is completely secondary to any scene that she's in. You could say that the line would be unnecessary.
Yep.
It might be a reaction line to what someone else says. Oh, really? Like that,
Yeah.
And she has a little bit of the at the end there's like she's in labor, but even that is kind of like the father character is actually more over the top around that whole scene.
Right.
And she's kind of just like doing what is typical of an in labor scene in a movie or TV show, just when the contractions and all that sort of thing. But so again, that kind of like that to me is a very specific weakness.
She's almost an NPC.
Yeah. It's a very specific weakness to me that actually knocks it down, and that's why I kind of come at this movie and give it a 5.5 for performances.
It's a fair point.
All right, we're gonna move on to Biodome now. Give me what you got.
Biodome. Well, I'm going to go down a little bit. I'm going to give the performances in Biodome a 4.5. There are performances in this movie. There's no shortage of recognizable names performing in this movie. Pauly Shore, of course, Stephen Baldwin, Joey Lauren Adams, William Atherton, and even people who you might not know their names, but you will recognize their faces. They all have track records and other things that, indicate that they are hireable professionals. And of course, there's a range within this movie. But for whatever reason, the material they were given or how they chose to execute that material, or maybe they were left to their own devices, you're left to wonder about all these questions when you watch the performances here, because they're often unintelligible, incomprehensible. Things are happening. It's not for a lack of energy.
No, definitely not. No,
there's people who are not holding back.
No, not at all.
And normally that sort of gives you more to work with in a performance. You feel the energy, and it translates into something that's like more impressive. Mm-hmm. Here, it translates into more confusion, I feel like. And because there's just so much of that, I really can't. My 4.5 is to recognize the energy and the effort, but you lose me after that. So 4.5 for that.
All right. Well, I don't disagree with anything you said, because my score is going down even a little bit to a 4. There's not a lot to like. A lot of times you can see what they're going for. With this, again, you talk about the energy level of the two main primary protagonists of the film, yep. And it just doesn't hit. And this can tie into writing too, which is the next category, and we'll get to that. Right. There's no humanity in these characters at all.
That's a good way to put it.
They are just written as jokes, and that's all they are.
Yeah.
They don't interact in the world that makes sense, even for characters that would exist in this ridiculous world, I feel like. Because other characters around them are able to respond to stimuli in ways that seem human within the bounds of the reality that this movie creates.
Yeah.
And even within those bounds, the two primary protagonists of the movie do not react to things in ways that a human in that world would react.
They're less than one dimensional.
They really, yes, they are. They're single joke, and it's even hard to define what the joke is.
Right.
So I go for, there's a strength here, which might be, and when I explain what the strength is, that might actually make you, it kind of illustrates even more of the weakness. Because this movie is, to get to a 4 for me, this required a boost. And that boost comes from William Atherton as Dr. Faulkner. He's, of course, known as Peck from Ghostbusters, as I said in the basics. He does some really fun stuff, especially in the final third, when he's, spoiler alert, he kind of turns into the villain. You see it coming, but we'll talk about later why that doesn't really work. But when he finally is the villain at the end, there's a lot of fun things going on. He's doing like pretty decent physical comedy. Yeah. He's doing some interesting things with like just his face and the performance. Like, I actually liked some of that. And me liking that performance boosted this movie all the way up to a 4. It's from wherever that means it was sitting before that boost happens.
Right.
So it's a compliment to Atherton and that performance, maybe even the writing at that point, just for those few scenes. But it's also kind of, again, it illustrates the deficiencies and the rest of it when all of those positive things I said only get it to a 4.
Right.
So, so that's where I arrive at a 4. Okay, so that's performances for Biodome. You gave it a 4.5. I gave it a 4. Now we're on to round 3. We're going to talk about writing. We're going to talk about License to Drive first, and I guess I will go first. I'm giving writing for License to Drive a 5. Again, kind of underneath the good line. And I've hinted at it before in the other categories, and this is where I really arrive at the point. The unevenness, it just doesn't hold together to me. And you've pointed out that there was some, maybe you saw it as kind of a strength with the visuals, maybe some of the performances where you had these high notes. But to me, it just doesn't quite come together. It doesn't meld. So you have all these different elements where, again, as I said before, this movie very much has some of the tropes of like a teen movie of its time.
Absolutely.
It also has a lot of this like, hey, one wild night, out on the world is ours type of thing. That's also a trope in a different, kind of a slightly different type of youth teen movie.
Yeah.
You also have this sort of like borderline mystical stuff happening that's kind of, adventures in babysitting-ish, especially with sort of like fantasy cutaways and things like that. And I give you credit for that comparison. Adventures in Babysitting, something that you mentioned. As we were watching, and that really stuck with me as I was watching it. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there's also this weird, what struck me as this earnest element. Yeah. Where some of these characters are so cartoony and so one-dimensional, sometimes in a good way, but again, they don't fit into the world that's created in the movie. Right. And so it just doesn't hold together. And again, a 5 isn't bad. I'm giving this movie a 5, as I said. That's not bad because the foundation is there for something interesting, even though it's a little bit derivative because it was done in Ferris Bueller and it's been done in a few other things. But the foundation is there for something solid. But I just feel like they didn't know exactly where they wanted to take it. I feel like the writers were, and maybe there was studio interference. You don't know what happens and things like that. I feel like the writers maybe wanted to push it into sort of a more imaginative direction. Right. But then they pump the brakes, and then they end up in a no man's land somewhere in between, going maybe where they wanted and then trying to hold back to sort of something that would have been more typical.
Compromise the movie.
It compromised the movie. Maybe that's what it is, and it just doesn't hold together. Again, 5's not bad because I see some of the potential, but it doesn't feel very cohesive to me. So that's how I arrive at a 5.
I mean, I don't really feel any differently. I guess I feel half a point more in favor of it because I score a 5.5. Not too dissimilar at all. I give it credit for what it did achieve and what it was trying to achieve with the score of 5.5. And there's a lot that it didn't achieve, obviously. It is, of course, it's an 80s teen movie. A vehicle for the Coreys. How good was it ever going to be But I will say that I was surprised to even get a 5.5 out of the writing. I was surprised to get a 7 for the visuals. I mean, it did surprise me positively in several ways. We even discussed that while things like Ferris Bueller's Day Off came before this, and it's clear that it sort of had its inspirations on its sleeve. It's also clear that movies that came after this probably pulled from this. Things like Superbad we discussed.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that
Nick and Nora's Ultimate Playlist was another one
Yeah.
that came up in conversation. Right.
you get... There's a quality that a lot of the things that were here in this time period maybe would have fared better in the future. I mean, Superbad was a smash hit using almost an identical template. Almost identical gags in certain parts of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Seemed like they were lifted right from this. And, you know, there's... The story itself isn't anything groundbreaking. Certain lines, you know, I guess kind of tickled me. They, you know, every movie puts their kind of little stamp on familiar things. And they do that here. Some of the dialogue, again, for the more character-y performers, the James Avery stuff that he was saying was particularly amusing. Corey Feldman stuff, which is, again, it's very familiar and it's very much something he's done a lot of, but it's reliably entertaining. He's good at delivering those kinds of lines, those kinds of wacky best friend performances. So yes, it's equally uneven for me. It kind of is this little roller coaster of oh, that was pretty good. Oh, what were they thinking? You know,
Yes, yeah.
Disjointed moments, like you said.
Well, with visuals, I mean, you were talking about, you mentioned a couple times the drive-in, this big set piece. So that factors into writing too, because you have this like amazing set piece, but then we're not really going to use it. We're not going to explore why it's playing like 80s sort of like pop R&B,
Right.
But it looks like it's right out of the 50s, and it looks like something out of American Graffiti visually, and it sounds like something of its time in the 80s. And visually it looks amazing, and then we don't really explore it.
No, and in fact, that's another one of my writing weaknesses for this, where it's used as kind of a backdrop for getting into a scuffle or a narrow miss with a scuffle with this group of bullies, and there's nothing there. Like it sort of teases that it's going to happen. They narrowly avoid it, and you never see them again.
No.
So that's, you know, again, it doesn't give you any backstory for these characters. It doesn't develop them further than just a very quick threat and a reason for them to leave this giant set piece prematurely.
Yeah.
So, very uneven.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll give a movie credit if it doesn't have like an antagonist, because that means that they're finding another way to tell a story.
Right.
And this movie doesn't really have a primary antagonist, but it kind of hints at a group. It gives you a little bit and then pulls it away, and I just don't think it quite works. So I don't mean to keep interrupting you. This is about your score for writing, not mine.
5.5.
And I gave it a 5. So now we're going to talk about Biodome. So I gave Biodome a 2. This might be the lowest score I've ever given any movie in any category. Somebody can check the archives and let us know if I'm wrong about that.
Damn close if it's not.
It's really low. Again, I kind of have hinted at some of it that we've already talked about, but it comes down so much to the characters. You have the characters played by Pauly Shore and Stephen Baldwin are your two primary protagonists of this movie.
Allegedly.
Exactly. Well, at no time are they shown to be at all moral or ethical. They want you to think that they're just sort of like fun-loving troublemakers.
Right.
But they don't have the hearts of gold part. They don't seem to have that at all. And again, they don't react to any situation as any human would react to a situation, even within the reality of this movie. They are so immoral and unthinking in their behavior that they become destructively antagonistic to other characters in the movie, whether or not those characters deserve that. They just destroy a lab
Yeah.
The guy was trying to, like, he's just working with his butterflies, and they just destroy the lab. And they don't ever really learn from that. It's just for laughs, and then they move on. And that's all down to writing. I just have such issues with any attempt. And then here's another a big weakness of the writing overall. I guess this would be more of a weakness of plot structure. So in the final, not even the final third, maybe the final 10th, they finally sort of like have this realization of their mistakes and this change of heart.
Yeah.
After the big party, they decide they're going to clean up the biodome and close it back up and do the experiment right.
Right.
And then presumably like a year passes.
Yeah.
And so during that year, you would have had all the character growth finally happen.
Mm-hmm.
But the viewer only sees this for a couple minutes.
Very quick montage of holidays, yeah.
And there's still not really a lot of there's not a lot of evidence that their behavior has actually changed in any observable way. They still are just like those characters telling jokes, I guess, and dancing randomly and just like really falling back on, sometimes it felt a little improv-y to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it was, but it just felt like the moments where every scene leads to these two characters doing their shtick, but it's never actually a joke. It's just like, hey, my shoe fell in the water. And then we're going to do
make a bunch of noises.
And then we're going to make noises and dance. And it's like, I don't. So, and again, and mostly like that's a problem with the characters. And then, but it's really doomed by the fact that you're setting up these uncaring characters to fix them and turn them into human beings. But the movie just kind of glosses over that part in like 3 minutes.
Right.
So that becomes a problem both with writing the characters in the first place and with plotting the movie from beginning to end, because that's just terrible pacing.
Yep.
And then finally, my last comment on writing is about pace, because this movie is 95 minutes?
Yes. 95
minutes. And when I think we were an hour and 10 minutes in, I asked, how much longer is this? It was, to use your vocabulary word, an interminable 95 minutes.
It was.
And so again, that's just another knock against the writing. So pretty brutal. Maybe my lowest score ever. Claude, what do you got?
I 1 point higher than you. I'll give it a 3. Half of what is considered to be a good score.
You might call this bad.
I think we are comfortably in the bad territory with these numbers. I basically echo the things you said, and I will expand upon it by saying that indifference is kind of the theme for these heroes. And it's not like that isn't ever an element of a protagonist in a film or a story, and it's not like that can't work. But when you let them be indifferent for 70% of the runtime, or of the script, or whatever the story was written to be, that's a problem. And they're not just indifferent; they're indifferent to the point of maliciousness.
Yes.
Which is confusing, because at one point, I think we said when we were watching this, or we agreed that the William Atherton's character, the doctor who's leading the biodome team, you get the sense that the way it's plotted out, like the way the roles are assigned, is he's supposed to be the big villain that, hates these like fun-loving guys. And but the movie, the roles are reversed for most of the movie. Like the fun-loving guys are annoying to the point where you're not rooting for them as a viewer.
No.
And the Atherton character is like really patient and
he's
accommodating. Yeah. Really like tolerant of these morons. And you kept expecting it to be a deception. He was going to turn on him like when nobody was looking. And they eventually get there, but not anywhere near when they should have. You could have, if you cut 20 minutes off of this 95-minute movie, you would have a story where these two fun-loving characters are the villains
Yeah.
for the whole time.
Yep. They destroy everything.
Yeah, literally
Everything, including their relationships.
Yeah. And they're just like mindlessly laughing about all of it the entire time. And then when they get to the end, and they've ruined everything to the point where the entire story is canceled. Everybody's leaving the biodome. Everybody's given up on it. Then they go, well, wait a minute, where are you going? Why don't you want to help us make this better? And they're all just like, wait, you mean the thing you just destroyed? 5 minutes ago?
5 minutes ago. Literally.
Like, last night you ruined the whole thing? Yeah, it's very confusing. And I think we've also agreed while watching it that it just felt like somebody handed Pauly Shore a budget and I guess a distribution deal and some crew members and said, you know what? Go play.
Some bullet points.
Yeah, exactly. I guess there's a director for this movie, but it feels like whoever's credited as the director has to be a Pauly Shore student because it just feels like he was given free reign, and he's been entertaining, highly entertaining, even in other films and projects that he didn't have control over, and maybe he didn't in this, but it sure feels like it.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
On top of all that, they do it all seemingly in a language that only the two of them understand.
Yes.
And that just, the audience is not even in on the joke. So I go with 3.
Some pretty low scores. 3. I give it a 2. Now we're on to round 4. Round 4 is going to be audio. We're going to talk about License to Drive, but this time Claude goes first.
I give the audio and License to Drive a 5.5. It's fine mostly. Some of it's a little confusing. Even within the confusion, the choices are better. They're more entertaining than when we get to Biodome, you'll understand. But I enjoyed the pop music selection more, even though it wasn't always matching what you were seeing on screen. But it's, it's very of its time. It's very dictated by individual moments and not necessarily the right ones, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's outside of like the pop music. The score music is forgettable. But the technical audio presentation is fine. It's even good. Mm-hmm. So, you get a mixed bag here, and I think that a score of 5.5 reflects that.
So I gave License to Drive a 6. This is my first and only 6 of this episode. 6 is good, as we've already said. But yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think the pop music choices are interesting. I think they don't always, like you said, it goes with this whole movie. It's not always cohesive, but I think the music is serving what's happening visually or what's happening in terms of the plot. So I don't penalize the music choices for that, because that penalty goes against either the writing, usually the writing. Yeah. So I don't penalize music for that, although yes, there is some incoherence there. And there are some weird choices, and to me, it was a little bit more fun, because it's like, okay, if you're going to do this incoherent switch to this cartoony character, and you're going to give me cartoony music, all of a sudden you're going to give me a muted trumpet over synthesizer. Like, the James Avery character shows up, and the kind of theme that I guess this is more of a score, not so much soundtrack. The theme that plays over that character sounds like a dog bark played backwards. So that's an interesting choice. And again, whatever lack of coherence the movie has, the audio is serving that choice that was made further upstream. So I'm not penalizing the audio for that in terms of the score or in terms of the soundtrack. On a technical level, it's very competent. Nothing's muffled. The volumes don't go up and down. There are a few sort of like action-y scenes. There's even a couple of explosions. Yeah. They don't overpower anything else. So I arrive, because for all those reasons, I arrive right squarely on 6, again, for the only time in this episode. All right, so you gave it 5.5, I gave it 6. We're going to go on to Biodome.
Well, I mean, I go down, but I don't go down as far as anyone would expect. I go to 5. It's not good. It's underneath. It's right underneath. But, I mean, right out of the gate, it's of its time, too, which is fine. I mean, it was made in a year. Everything has to be made at a certain point and use what it has available. The pop song choices range from predictable to derivative. And we have one song in here that is used no less than 3 times throughout the movie. Whether they were stretching that $8 million or what, could only get 4 songs and really thought that they could squeeze some mileage out of the one. I don't know, but it's noticeable, and that takes away from things and knocks the score down a little bit. There was even one song in particular where they lifted it right from Dumb and Dumber the year before, a much more superior zany comedy duo movie. But I will say that in terms of audio, like the sound that you're hearing, there are a lot of sounds in this movie that are like beyond annoying, that are just hammering you. Length of time, and there's a little bit of that in License to Drive too. Some of the annoying like car horns last really long just to really let you know the character is being irritated. But in this movie, it just goes up. It's every like stock fart sound you can, and it's just used every 5 seconds, and just like we joked at one point about there would be like a scene happening, and out of nowhere there was a fucking belch sound effect when nobody even visibly belched. It was just in there. And it's like, oh, we almost made it through a scene without a fart or a belch. Again, this isn't old man yelling at the clouds. This is like, it just doesn't even make sense. So I probably 5 is generous. So I give the audio a 5.
All right, so I went down 4.5. The belch sound, I just got to start with that before I forget. That happens in a scene where the 2, Bud and Doyle, have basically destroyed everything, and the rest of the Biodome crew have decided that they need to be banned to like the desert habitat.
Right.
And so this is supposed to be like a serious scene. They've been banned, and they're walking down the steps, and that's when somebody belches.
It's the most emotionally serious scene in the entire movie.
It's the best attempt this movie makes at being serious. And the characters are facing away from the camera, so you don't see anybody go like this. But you just like, it'd be a good thing for this spot right here, a burp.
Let's put a button on it.
So that's the choice they made in that moment. In terms of overall, again, I gave it a 4.5. The pop music choices were like interesting, but it's like, they leaned on that song a 3rd time.
Yeah.
We both half expected it to play for lucky number 4 during the credits, right. And they didn't choose to do that. There was a weird choice they make when the character Faulkner, played by William Atherton, kind of finally goes bad at the end, and they introduce him, and you hear these notes, da-da-da-da.
Oh yeah.
but then it goes somewhere else. It's not the Addams Family theme, but it is the Addams Family theme.
It's the first.
Da-da-da-da. It's 4 notes in a row.
It's the first 4 notes of that song. Like, it's not even just it's the same notes. It's the same instrument. It's lifted from the Addams Family score and pasted onto something else.
It's just puzzling beyond belief. And in addition to other sort of like fart noises and burp noises and whatever else, they mix in like cartoon noises, and they just do things for no reason. At the end of the movie, there's a big explosion because the character of Faulkner is trying to blow up the Biodome, right? But they survive. They come through the smoke, and Bud and Doyle reunite with their girlfriends. And then the cops run into the burning building behind them, and you hear hup, 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 hup.
Right out of Monty Python.
Right out of Monty Python or Keystone Cops or Looney Tunes. But it's just like, it's not even done as a clever joke because that's happening. That's like 3 levels deep in the movie. Not only do you have because in that scene you have the characters talking to each other, and you've got like a crowd murmuring and reporters trying to get a word in, and then the hup, hup, hup happening in the background. So I assume they thought that was like a clever Easter egg to put in the background.
Exactly that, yeah.
But instead it just sticks out like a sore thumb. It's completely unnecessary. So
look how smart we are.
No, we get it. It's not that deep. So yeah, just some weird choices that go along with the rest of the weird bad choices of Biodome. So I gave it again what I feel is kind of a generous score of 4.5 against your 5. All right, so those are 4 rounds of scoring. We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to have final scores. All right, we're back, and we have some final scores after 4 rounds of scoring. And let's take a look at what we've got. For Biodome, we have 4.38. And for License to Drive, taking the win at 5.63. Any first reactions to those scores?
Yeah, I'm surprised Biodome is that high.
I don't disagree.
I do. Inching close to a 5, despite all odds. License to Drive is, it's just, I guess technically gave it a 6 overall. It's right below a 6. I mean, it's good. It's, I'll watch it again. I remarked when we watched it that I wish I had seen it at an earlier age. I could see myself having watched it numerous times over the years. There's enough there to make me come back again. Biodome is I will avoid it unless the alternative is just literal nails on a chalkboard.
I don't disagree. Yeah, License to Drive 5.63, technically under our level of good, but I think it's harmless. It's light. It's enjoyable.
Yeah.
There's a lot of movies that I would rate this ahead of. Biodome, 4.38. Again, I agree with you. I was surprised it was that high.
Right.
Our lowest scoring movie on the show was Rotor, which had under a 3.
Yep.
But if you ask me which movie I'd rather watch Rotor every time over Biodome. Biodome just fails on such a fundamental level for me that I can't. We watched both of these movies today to remind ourselves of them or watch them for the first time, depending on the situation.
Right.
I can say that I will mark it down. This is the final time I will ever see Biodome because I will never choose to watch. Again, if it was a choice between Biodome and Meteor Impact, well, I'll have to think about it. But License to Drive, I could see watching that again. Sure. I probably wouldn't be choosing it. It would be on accident. But I wouldn't be...
See it on TV, maybe you don't turn it off.
Right. I wouldn't be averse to it. Biodome, I'm going to actively avoid in the future because I did not enjoy that interminable 95 minutes.
Use that license to drive away from Biodome as far as you can get.
Absolutely. All right, so that's it for this episode of Nerd Bomber versus Movies. You can find us on YouTube. Obviously, you already have. We also have an Instagram page that is at NerdBomberPod. That is maybe the best place to go to find links to the things we do and links to both of our individual pages and the stuff we do on our own. So for your friend Claude, I've been Just Jamie, and until the next battle,
Aloha.